time loops in justice, mythic wounds and modern trials. Let's take a look at how lessons and teachings can play out through the stories of Apollo, Cassandra, and the karma of Eros. This is the Rain Free Podcast. These audio teachings are an extension of the Sovereign Rain Healing Community. Tune in to break out. Streaming now on YouTube, Spotify, and in our very own Lumist app. If you are watching on an audio-only platform, please know this episode discusses possible triggers and sensitive topics around pregnancy and conception. Please use your discernment given your current situation or your lived experience. This content may not be appropriate for children. Please watch separately without them in the room to be able to make an informed decision. Hello, this is Rain Free. This is a podcast for Sovereign Rain. We typically look at second level spiritual teachings and mysticism, but specifically in a way to heal abuse or severe traumas. So if this is something interesting to you, stick around. This is episode 2, and in this episode, we will dive through the myths of Apollo and Cassandra. So in second level spiritual teachings, we can often look to myth and parable for a lot of knowledge. It's one way of preserving knowledge throughout time, to have these characters go through stories, and there is a lot of wisdom available there if you know how to decode these myths and parables to get the teaching. So today we'll look at Apollo and Cassandra, and originally I was just hoping to do a short episode and draw the parallels between Apollo and Cassandra and the Sean Combs and Cassie trial. But as I went and read the Apollo and Cassandra myths myself and did a little bit of research, I got actually a little pissed off. So there's a lot more here. I went down a little bit of a rabbit hole, but there's still really good teachings here, and we will approach it through the lens of dragon energy, time loops, modern justice systems, as well as ancient justice systems, and maybe some ideas of masculine and feminine eros. So stick around if those things are interesting to you, and let's dive right in. So to understand these teachings and some of the symbolic second level teachings that are in Apollo and Cassandra, we need to have a little bit of background on, first, what is the common teaching that comes out of the Apollo and Cassandra relationship and how this myth is typically perpetuated in modern day? And then also the origin stories and some background on Mother Earth, but ancient Earth specifically. So Apollo and Cassandra typically gets told as a story of Apollo coming down and offering Cassandra this gift. And the gift would be of prophecy. So she would become like an oracle. She would have this foresight and premonition that she would be able to use to, right, become of value, but to tell and inform the civilizations or kingdoms that she would live in, and inform, right, like the action that those civilizations would take from there. The deal was that in return, she would provide Apollo favor, and that with this relationship, then Apollo would give her this gift of prophecy, and that Cassandra, in return, would give him relationship. So because she was given the gift of prophecy by Apollo, and she used it in to warn her civilization of a downfall. So she didn't just get the gift, she had already utilized it. But then the story gets told as Cassandra refusing Apollo's advances and not keeping up her end of the bargain. So she broke the deal. She got the gift and she used it. And here she is denying Apollo her end of the deal and not allowing his advances. And so Apollo is mad, and he curses Cassandra to only ever be able to tell the truth, but no one will believe her. And because this gift was real, her gift of prophecy was real, and Apollo held up his end of the bargain, she actually is so accurate in her readings and not believed, right, as a part of her curse, that people start to blame her for what happens. So it's like the only way you could be so accurate in knowing the future was if you actually took part in planning it and carrying it out. So when she prophesizes these really dramatic, like murders and conquests, like Troy, um, the gift horse of Troy. She prophesies that, but people are like, how could you have known that? Right? Her curse of not being believed turned into a course of, wow, we see how accurate you are. We don't believe that you could predict the future. We believe you are actually partaking in making these crimes come true so that you look like an oracle, like you have the gift of prophecy. So that's the backstory on the teaching that is very popularized out of Apollo and Cassandra. And now we'll dig into a little bit of the teaching that's actually there when you read through just one of the manuscripts that's been translated, by the way, as well. And I'll drop the link in some of the description boxes where this will be posted. But this is Agellius's Agamemnon, translated by G. Theodoridius, 2005. Copyright 2005 anyway. And this is from people.uncw.edu. And it's written kind of like a playwright script or a poem, and it has a couple different roles in it. But let's start on page 34. I think is enough of the story to see what's happening here. So as translated in this in the Aeschylus's Agamemnon, translated by G. Theodorus, we pick up on page 34 to say, Cassandra, the seer Apollo made me a prophet. Chorus, could it be that he, God though he is, was struck hard and wounded by desire? Cassandra, there was a time when shame would hold my tongue. Chorus, happiness and courtesy come together. Cassandra, still, Apollo fought hard to win me. Love's fire gave him strength. Chorus, and did you marry later and have children? Cassandra, I had promised him we would, but I've never kept my promise. Chorus, but were you already possessed by Apollo's skill? Cassandra, I had already prophesied to the people of my city their awful fate. Chorus, how did Apollo punish you? Cassandra, after I betrayed him, no one would believe me. Chorus, yet to us your words seem to be true. Cassandra here is said to suddenly hysterically scream as if she just realized what's happening behind the palace walls. She shakes this way and that, holding her head as if in pain. And then she goes on to share prophecy that's really intense. And we won't dive into that because the important piece here that started to make me really angry is that the way that this transcript says anyway, is not that Cassandra at all is denying Apollo's advances or that she still sounds really upset that she couldn't keep this promise. And throughout this transcript, she'll call out to Apollo, oh God, Apollo, multiple times. And it really doesn't sound like someone who was resisting or even now is truly angry at Apollo. She's really, throughout what I've read here anyway, looking for understanding in Apollo and the actions he's taken in cursing her. And I think the most important line with this is from Chorus here, who says, "And did you marry later and have children?" I had promised him we would, but I've never kept my promise. And so I think in these two lines alone, what I really start to see in this story anyway is the woman's ability to have a child. I start to look at this story and wonder if it wasn't really anything about Cassandra denying the advances of Apollo, but whether she could truly bear children. And I think this plays out a lot in modern society as well. So we can look into a lot of recent activity actually from 2024 onward that really puts a lot of the burden on the female or the woman's body. And in some states, even after the overturn of Roe versus Wade, you start to see laws approaching miscarriage and punishing the woman for miscarriage and handling or mishandling of a fetus. So, as we start to look at Apollo and Cassandra from this angle of did you later marry and have children, you can start to see a different side of this myth come to light. And and ask the question, are we still playing out ancient Greece in modern times of not understanding what is required or the responsibility in both the masculine and feminine energies in carrying a child to full term? So we'll dive into this a little bit more from a few different mythical angels and symbol angles, sorry, and symbolism that's carried out in this typical telling of Apollo versus Cassandra. But to get us started, that's the common teaching of Apollo and Cassandra, and that is the translation of Achilles' Agamemnon, translated by G. Theodoresis 2005, and we'll drop that link for people's reference so you can read that for yourself. And let's see, so it's page 34 here in the online version, but if you were to have it in a different format, it's actually labeled page 36. So do what you will or need to with that. All right, so if we step into some of the modern day stuff, Roe versus Wade, I know big triggers, but we can also look to a Time article from May 31st, 2017, titled Five Ways Men Shape Their Children's Health. Vitamin D levels, alcohol, poor diet, obesity, stress, smoking, and metal fumes. And then step into some of the headlines about Roe versus Wade, but in this case, specifically from The Guardian about women in West Virginia who miscarry and the possibility that they could face criminal charges. This was a pretty disturbing article for me personally to read. And also, I would like to mention that I have not been pregnant nor carried a child to term. So this is not exactly my area of authority, but when we look at the knowledge available to us in present day about these things, and look back at this myth of Cassandra and Apollo, I think there's a lot of parallels that start to really point toward a time loop here and maybe a repeating of mistakes, ideas, or punishment, and maybe even punishment out of grief. Who's to say that Apollo wasn't really grief-stricken, that he couldn't get a family, and here he's already provided a gift to someone? What's he supposed to do with all of that grief and this person who can't provide their end of the deal? Okay, the perpetuation again of Apollo and Cassandra was just echoed in Britannica as well. So just providing people a little bit of backstory here. And if you want to do your own research, that is, and kind of see where this information is coming from. So we'll have that linked to the Britannica as well. seeing if there's anything I wanted to read specifically from this. Yeah, we're just saying again that the common teaching here for about Apollo and Cassandra is, and Cassandra, daughter of King Priam of Troy, rejected his advances and was punished by being made to utter true prophecies that no one believed. Right? Here she is again rejecting his advances. But if you read this Achilles is Agamemnon version, she really seems to sound heartbroken to me. All right. Okay, so that's the original teaching of, right? That was one of the original teaching of Apollo and Cassandra, and one of the themes that we seem to be playing out here again in 2004, 2025, with looking to persecute women that miscarry, um, and really attaching a woman's worth to this idea of childbirthing. I've ran into this only once in an extreme case. I was sitting at really, it was a nice bar, like it was a really nice Italian restaurant that had a bar. I was sitting next to another female who was probably mid 30s, and neither of us married and neither of us had children. This 70-year-old man next to us started to tell us that our sole purpose in life was to have children. That's about as close as I've really come to this level of persecution, maybe even within persecution, social persecution anyway, not literal legality persecution. Um, and the other way this comes about too is really in a unintentional way of doing harm, right? With your family being curious is another way that this will come up. I've had friends who have had to try for 5 years to even conceive a child. So to go to all the Thanksgivings and Christmases and know that you're your mid-20s and people know that you're of age to be doing these things and that it's actually socially appropriate and encouraged to be having families. That questions like, oh, well, are you guys gonna have kids? Oh, okay. Well, when are we gonna have grandbabies? Actually becomes this really frustrating thing to have to run into during these times that should be a celebration. So, um, yeah, some of the story that I wanted, this myth that I really wanted to break apart here was to say there was a responsibility to both feminine energy and masculine energy in the conception of life. And it really plays out in these other more symbolic ways of Apollo's story as well. So we're going to start to dig into that here in the second part. And let me get my talking points up to that, and we'll be right back. All right, so now that we have some of the backstory there on Apollo and Cassandra, and really a little multi-layer approach to conception and what it means to bring life into this world, we also need to understand and take a look at the origins of Mother Earth, or I guess maybe a better way to say it is let's look at her ancient history. And for this, we'll step into some of the Mesopotamian tablets, the cuneiform tablets that recount histories of the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki are thought to be alien beings or an alien race that come to terraform Earth. But the important piece here is when you look across ancient history across the planet itself, there's a lot of record of the earth being called Ki as well as Tiamat. So when you use these ancient names or when these ancient names are used, they're really used in a way of reverence to say something more like Mother Earth is the way that we would say that today. So we have our Mother Earth. We have her ancient name Gaia. We have her even more ancient name Ki. And then before that, we have Tiamat. And then these Mesopotamian cuneiform tablets describe a time when the Anunna or the Anunnaki, this race of beings, come to this planet Tiamat, Tiamet. And Anu, the god, says that he wants this tamed. He wants Tiamat tamed and he wants her split up into two, is what winds up happening. So, kind of a sky and earth idea as well. But the important piece for this story is that Tiamat is said to be a sea salt water. Yeah, a saltwater sea serpent. That would be a better way of saying it. She is said to be a saltwater sea serpent, a female saltwater sea serpent. So there is this idea here that one, the Anu or the Anunnaki have a level of technology and capability to be able to tame this level of consciousness, this really wild and primordial feminine consciousness. And they do. So, as we look at that symbolism of Earth and her ancient history and how she's been terraformed over thousands of years, and how these different cultures and indigenous cultures, cuneiform tablets across the planet, all have documentation of ancient Earth being called Ki, as well as Tiamat, and Tiamat being um, split into Du or tamed. We can then look at the story of Apollo in a little different light as well, to look at once again a play of this solar masculine energy and logic, as well as the feminine life-giving type of energy in serpent form. So the other part of Apollo's story that becomes really important is this his taming of Pytho or Python. Let's see. So we'll read from Botanica on this one. It says, from there Apollo went to Pytho, Delphi, where he tamed Python, the serpent that guarded the area. He established his oracle by taking on the guise of a dolphin, leaping aboard a Cretan ship and forcing the crew to serve him. Thus, Pytho was renamed Delphi after Dolphin or Delphus, and the Cretan cult of Apollo Delphinius superseded the previously established there by Earth, Gaia. The real backstory of the dragon priestesses and dragon lineage becomes important here into understanding the true symbolism in the story or myth of Apollo and his slaying and taming of Python. So Python, or Delphi in this case, was a place where there was a fissure in the earth, and an oracle would go sit above that fissure. It was typically a female oracle, and they would physically climb up and sit above this fissure where volcanic gases would arise, and they would get premonitions and visions that they would then deliver to those who came seeking information or to those in rule. So this idea of a feminine Pytho. He went into Pytho. Pytho is a feminine space, a feminine earth knowledge area. Some liken it to a womb space, and that he tamed Python, the serpent that guarded the area. Python and Pytho, they're considered to be feminine knowledge, feminine wisdom, primordial earthbound wisdom as well of Earth. So in this way, we're seeing Apollo, who typically represents this very solar masculine energy of logos, logic, coming into a very feminine energy of intuition and a very feminine earth energy. And once again, we see the serpent symbolism coming up. Let's see. So where do we go from here? So we have Apollo taming uh, serpent energy and this birthing capability in his story of conquering Delphi. At Delphi, the other important piece of this, right? We're mentioning Oracle, but let's tie it to Cassandra. When he went into Delphi and conquered that space, what he's really also claiming is this gift of intuition and prophesizing. And it was the gift that he had agreed in this deal with Cassandra to pass down and that he did give to her. So they all kind of come together in this symbolism here, where then we see Cassandra not being able to marry and bear children, right? It's this idea of conquering the feminine space and feminine energy instead of working with it. And in a way, when this feminine energy can't give to you what you want, you curse it and ban it like from society. It becomes shunned by society. And the real frustration in this full myth with where we're at right now is that we know in modern times that the female is not the sole responsibility for growing a child and or bringing a child into life. And even pieces, I guess the frustrating part of this story too is that ancient Greece did investigate fertility, and they did know that the masculine had some role in fertility, but maybe they didn't know the more, I guess, I don't know, scientific areas of like actual placenta development and things like that, like the actual health and growing of the child once it was in a female womb in this case. All right, so that's Apollo and Cassandra so far. And you could even step into some of this and look for some more symbolism here as well. Um, you could look at Mother Earth, the place of Delphi, as an egg, right? You look at sperm and eggs and the idea of conceiving, and to say that this serpent energy, Pytho, was the womb that was protecting that egg, and that Apollo conquering and going in and slaying this womb space as well. I think there is a lot of erotic symbolism here that isn't spoke to in this really common teaching that just seems to perpetuate this idea of um, female responsibility on providing uh, their end of the bargain, I guess. I don't know how else to word it kindly. Uh, so you could look at some of the symbolism as earth and egg, Pythos and womb being a womb space, intuitive feminine knowledge, and then Apollo, who is sunlight, the sunlight. Like he is regarded as a symbol of sun, which is typically logic. Um, all right, so where I thought this podcast would originally go was to the Cassie and Sean Combs trial with modern justice loops before I found that rabbit hole. So let's touch on, before I found the other rabbit hole. So let's touch on this just a little bit. In watching the Sean Combs trial, what I really started to notice was a lack of understanding, I guess, explanation, a lack of clarity and explanation of not just abuse victims' behavior, but even a care, I guess, for victim representation in the jury specifically and jury selection process. That was the first episode. Go check that out if you're interested at all in hearing a different take, a victim's view, a survivor's view on jury selection, and just some of the things I heard people in the courtroom reporting out. Um, with that. But if we look at this case in the more modern teaching of Apollo and Cassandra, Cassandra was cursed to tell the truth, and no one believed her. Like to the detriment of she could see when she was a slave, she could see her own murder, and she would tell people, and that the king would also fall, and nobody believed her, so it winds up happening. But um, I don't know. There is a small parallel there between Cassie being a victim, getting up and taking the stand, this being a really sexually charged case, right? There's a lot of situations that might be hard for an average person to relate to with these really lavish ideas of sex parties and things of that nature. And what does it really mean to be in a feminine empowerment like that or to be taken advantage of like that? Remember the slaying of Pythos, and what responsibilities are there and what nuances can we understand, or do we even want to believe that are told to us about these situations that were being brought forward? So I did see a bit of a time loop here in some parallels between the Sean Combs trial and Cassie, very clear naming to Cassandra, and this there is a really erotic energy to both of these myths, both in the modern day teaching of trying to deny somebody's advances when you made this deal, whether it be for a prophesizing gift or fame, or in this, what I think is really the second level teaching of um, what happens when we don't hold both the masculine and feminine responsible for the creation of life, for an ethical creation of life, for desire and pleasure that's required to create life, to co-create life. Okay, so if we look at both of these examples of maybe what, I don't know, do we want to call it a first level teaching of denying somebody's advances when they've already given you a gift, or a second level teaching of saying, you're punishing me for something that I can't possibly be solely held responsible for, and I really don't understand it. I don't understand why you're banishing me and cursing me in this way. Both of those ideas are still playing out in modern times through the Sean Combs trial and through where our society is currently at and navigating abortion, as well as understanding masculine energy roles, but the man's role in carrying a child to full term. And you can see that in the headlines and in some of the ways that the states are pursuing criminalizing miscarriage. That West Virginia article, I'm not even going to read. I'll provide the link. It was really disturbing to me. Let me see if I can see. Is there a line where I can read? Well, I guess we'll just start with the opening sentence. Women in West Virginia could face criminal charges if they miscarry, a county prosecutor told a local news outlet last week, urging women who miscarry to contact law enforcement. The kind of criminal jeopardy you face is going to depend on a lot of factors. The Raleigh County prosecuting attorney, Ton Truman, told the outlet WVNS 59 News in comments reported on Friday. To include a list of questions, what was your intent? What did you do? How late were you in your pregnancy? Were you trying to hide something? Were you just so emotionally distraught you couldn't do anything else? He added, if you were relieved and you had been telling people, I'd rather get ran over by a bus than have this baby, that may play into law enforcement's thinking too. Valid, right? There's some, that's concerning comment, but miscarriages happen and there's not often, and sometimes there's not a lot of things people can do about it. And a miscarriage is actually a pretty traumatic event, even when it wasn't necessarily a planned situation. It's a pretty short article if you'd like to read more about that. Those were the big points. They even tried to sell this as to protect themselves. Truman suggested that women call law enforcement after they have a miscarriage. Anyway, in this way, when we see Cassandra being cursed by Apollo for not being able to bear children, when we see her not being believed for avoiding his advances, which other version of that myth you see in those stories of Apollo and Cassandra, you can look at our modern headlines and see these things playing out again in modern time and in modern ways, even in our pop culture. So let me know what you think about all of this. Let me know if there's other sides to any of these stories. I've only been to West Virginia once. Let me know. Is there other sides of the Apollo Cassandra story that you see? Is there other sides of this discussion that need to be had? I thought this was a really interesting perspective, and I happened to come across it at the time that I was that I was following a lot of the Sean Combs trial. All right, so let's kind of pull it all together because we covered quite a lot there actually, but I like to see how things all tie together. So I've been using the Mayan calendar to guide some of my content creation. And what is really interesting is that Wednesday and Thursday were both about chaos and finding the calmness, the stillness, the transformation in chaos. And then Friday comes into a red dragon energy. And then the red dragon energy being of birthing new manifestations, visions, taking focus to stabilize into these things. And when we look at this from a perspective of repeating time loops and getting stuck in time loops and not learning from traumas or lessons that you're being put through, like what's the point to this suffering? Not learning those lessons, um, you're likely to repeat them, right? History always repeats itself, is one of the common phrases. But in fourth way teachings, one thing they do believe in is reoccurrence. And a modern way of saying that is a time loop, but reoccurrence more specifically meaning even when you pass, you reincarnate into the same life lessons. Even some spaces believe down to the same parents. Same situations. You're always getting cut up on these arguments of, uh, well, abortion or miscarriage or war, whatever your sticking point is. The belief or the concept of recurrence says you are born into these things over and over and over again until you learn to awaken out of them, consciously rise above them. A modern way of saying this too is that even within the same lifetime, you would be repeating these lessons over and over again in a slightly different way and in a slightly different flavor, maybe, but you're still not learning the lesson, so you're doomed to repeat them. So if we look at this idea of time loops and birthing something new out of chaos, Tayame was our chaotic primordial female energy who was tamed and split into two, and how to use time a little differently. It's like, okay, so what? I have these ancient myths that are really paralleling a lot of modern day concepts, sticking points, societal structure, law that we're facing right now. And how can I use any of it? It's to look at time from a different perspective and how we use time as a tool to heal. There's been a lot of discussion even recently about timelines. You could look at timelines a couple different ways, but let's just speak to it as a perspective of birthing something new. And timelines having a lot of different qualities and characteristics to them. In a metaverse, there's infinite possibilities. And if you really believe in that concept or a concept of creating a different timeline for yourself, what does it take to evolve and learn from these lessons, even ancient repeating lessons? Using myth to pull out this ancient knowledge, to digest it and mull over it with my lived experience to see what lesson I can take, what knowledge can I take out of these ancient teachings and create my own personal wisdom out of my lived experience to create a new timeline for myself. And in this way, you're birthing a new existence, you're birthing a new timeline. You're using your dragon energy, but more specifically, in both of these myths as well, I think we need to point out the idea of the Kundalini, a feminine energy, a feminine life force energy that that is in a lot of myth and parable, but that when allowed to awaken and move up the spine, the serpent, the snake, that feminine energy, when she is allowed to awaken and when you know or learn the tools to awaken her, you awaken your consciousness, you awaken new human capabilities. And that allows you to heal parts of yourself. If you're trauma or abuse victim, you'll want to look for ways to change these beliefs that have been created out of abusive and traumatic situations and to truly alchemize those emotional sticking points so that you resolve that within yourself and replace a new empowering belief. And in that way, when you continue to feed this new belief, when you continue to focus your attention on that new belief, you're pulling density into that belief. So thought alone is enough to provide density into matter and for things to start to manifest, physically manifest, even in this subtle energy body in time. in an essence of time. So you can start to shift that timeline. You can start to ascend in consciousness and view a different perspective on your timeline. And in this way, the time loop becomes a time spiral. You're not just repeating the same pattern over and over and over again. You've learned your lessons and you're spiraling upward and ascending in the lessons that you're learning as you transmute them, as you instill those new beliefs that are empowering and supportive, as you provide forgiveness to people who have wronged you. And that is the idea also, right? This snake spiraling upward. There are a lot of symbolism overlaps here. So to sum everything up and wrap up this discussion, we could look at an idea of Apollo being very representative of the sun, logos, and logic, and saying that when we have an imbalance and we look at the idea of logic overriding our own intuitions and emotion, when we have an imbalance between these masculine and feminine archetypes of energy, and we're not holding both of them responsible for co-creating life, blaming one side or the other, that we get this very destructive type of chaotic force. And to break out of that time loop and less repetition or recurrence, we need to look for ways to find true resolve and a way to instill new beliefs out of either old mythic types of teachings, myth and parable teachings, expanding our spiritual awareness into these tools. And in that way, we can start to provide more balance with, especially in modern day, with the science and the information that's becoming available to us. So if you're interested in discussions like this, stick around. I've got a couple more ideas for podcasts in the near term, but this one was a look at Apollo and Cassandra, how it parallels modern time, the use of Eros and Logos and an imbalance in those powers, and how that can play out in time loops as well as fourth way concepts of recurrence. We also touched briefly on how to create and shift this, and especially if you've been in abuse or trauma. You want to use your feminine intuition, that emotion, as a guiding factor to help bring balance back into this imbalance of Apollo or Sun and Logos. So thank you for joining us. This is Rain Free, and I hope you enjoyed this episode. Check out the references. We'll link below, and let us know if there's other parts of this discussion that didn't get enough research or mention, or if there's other angles you'd like to explore. Thanks. Thank you for listening to Rain Free. These audio teachings are an extension of the Sovereign Rain Healing Community, where we tune in to break out. Now streaming on YouTube, Spotify, and in our very own Lumist app, available now in the Google Play Store as well as the Apple App Store. To learn more about spirituality and healing, you can check out the offerings of Sovereign Rain at sovereignrain.com or download the Lumist app.